The other big component of Tier 2 are what we call embedded learning opportunities. And embedded learning opportunities are these short teaching episodes where a teacher sets up and there's a match between the classroom activities and a child's individual learning objectives. So in order to implement embedded learning opportunities, I have to know what the goals are that I'm trying to work on with the child. Whether it's letter identification, whether it's manipulating objects, whether it's sharing friends materials with a friend, whether it's following directions, whether it's whatever the case may be, I have to know, understand. Remember, I said authentic assessment is key to implementing blended practices. So I have to know my child's development. The purpose of implementing embedded learning opportunities is to increase the number of opportunities a child has to practice a skill that they are struggling with. Remember, at Tier 2, we're working with children who are struggling, whose development is stalled. And so we want to provide as many opportunities for practice as we possibly can. And so you all should have today in your handout that Walt sent to you yesterday, you should have a copy of an embedding schedule. And so I'm going to ask you now if you'll pull that out or get access to that, because shortly we're going to do a little practice activity. And so I want you all to have that available when we do that activity. So the steps for implementing embedded learning opportunities is, first of all, you have to know your child's goals. You have to know what children need to work on. You then need to select activities during the day when it's possible for you to embed instruction on that goal. So, for example, if I'm interested in teaching a child to let's go with write their name. If I'm interested in teaching, I want to practice the child writing their name. Then if that's the case, then I have to think about when are the opportunities during the day when a child could write their name. Well, I might have a sign-in sheet when they come to class in the morning that they have to sign in. And not for the parent to sign the child in, but for them to sign themselves in. I might have a writing center where the children can write their name. I might have an art activity that they do where they have to write their name. So I want to make sure that I have 3 or 4 activities during the day when I can do that. If I'm working with a child on sharing materials, well, when can I share materials? Well, a child can share materials when they're playing a game with someone else. They could share materials at meal times. They could share materials out on the playground. So I want to think about those times during the schedule when a child could share materials or could work on a particular goal. Then I want to identify any kind of strategy that's going to help me teach that goal. So for example, if I'm teaching a child to write their name, then perhaps one of the strategies that I want to use is some kind of a visual support to show the child how how they write their name. If I'm trying to get a child to share materials with somebody else, then I could use visual support, or I might want to use some kind of peer support to help the child do that, or I might want to model for the child how to do that. So once I've identified what my strategies are, then I'm going to implement the instruction as planned. And I'm going to do that by remembering that complete teaching sequence that I talked to you earlier about, by giving the child clear instructions, by allowing the child to respond, and providing feedback. And then I'm going to keep track of the opportunities to see if the child is making progress by periodically checking to see whether or not they've achieved their objective or not. So the way that we plan for embedded learning opportunities is by doing something called an embedding schedule. And this is an embedding schedule that one of the teachers in our school developed. And you'll see that there are 2 goals or outcomes here at the top. The first is initiate and complete independent activities. And the second is to use conversational rules when communicating with others. So that's like taking a turn in a conversation and initiating and completing independent activities. So the teacher identified some activities during the day when the child could work on those goals: art, writing, dramatic play, blocks, circle time, and outside. And then in the corresponding blocks, she's listed the strategies that could be used for teaching that skill within that activity. So for initiate and complete independent activities, the teacher has said that she would use peer modeling. And she said, when peer is participating at the writing center, encourage him to share, I think, with friends. And then to use conversational rules when communicating, that during the writing center, it says engage in peer and adult conversation while using writing center. So for each of those, like in dramatic play, asking open-ended questions; for blocks, scaffolding the child to help them initiate. And so I'm listing the strategies. Remember, I spoke earlier about the fact that, a lot of times in early childhood, we're really, really good about identifying the activities and developing a schedule. And we may even be good about identifying the outcomes we're going to work on with the children. But the third piece of all of this is identifying the strategies that we're going to use to teach those skills within those activities. And so I provided for you all today an embedding schedule. And what I'd like for you all to do, I'm going to give you about, about 7 minutes. I'm going to give you about 7 minutes to do this. And I'd like for you all to practice. I would like for you to identify one or two goals that you work on with a child or a group of children in your classroom. And then I'd like for you to identify some activities during the day where you think that you might be able to practice those skills. And then I'm going to ask you to list some strategies that I've talked about today that you could use to teach those skills within those activities. So I will start that now. I'm going to take about a 2-minute break, and I will come back. And once you have finished that, let me say this: once you have finished creating your embedding schedule, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to ask questions about that. So I'll ask you to put those questions in whatever format Walt has identified for you there about that, or any thoughts that you have about the usefulness of using an embedding schedule to support a more intentional teaching in your classroom. So now you have 6 minutes to practice the embedding schedule and to pose some questions in the chat box or wherever it is you write the questions. And I'll return in just a second and we'll go through those.
Thank you, Dr. Grisham. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. That would probably be the best, the easiest place to put your questions. Thank you so much.
All right. According to my clock, we have. Can you hear me okay? Well,
We can hear you. We can hear you.
okay. All right. According to my clock, I have 25 after. And so I'm ready to take questions from folks about that, what you think about the embedding schedule and how it might be useful to you in planning, or any thoughts that you have about that.
We have a question in the chat, and the question comes from Karen. And the question is, do you want us to tell you what we are working on?
Well, I don't, unfortunately, in this format, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that. And that's the reason why I was just hoping that folks could tell me, give me their thoughts a little bit about what they think about the process, if they think that it would be useful in trying to meet the needs of diverse children in their classrooms. And so that's kind of what I was hoping for.
Sure. We have a question.
Okay.
And it's more the it's not necessarily a question, but a comment about the process. It is this is excuse me, this comment is from Brittany. As a coach for Childcare Aware, I think this will be a great tool for me to use with the centers I work with to help staff think about what they are already doing throughout the day that help them meet the outcomes they're looking for. Many times when I'm working with a staff member, they think that they need to plan some huge elaborate activity. But when I break it down, they see that many times they are already doing things throughout the day.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that to take that a step further, I think that what, the embedding schedule does is to help folks be a little bit more intentional. And I think that when it comes to supporting children, let's say that you do have a child in your program that has a disability or has some kind of a learning challenge, that sometimes I think that what you're saying, Brittany, is that we sometimes say we have to do something different, in order to meet the needs of that child. But basically what the embedding schedule is helping you do is that it's helping you think about, how can I do what I'm already doing and add something to that so that that activity works for the child. And so there's kind of two parts to that. First of all, I have to know, what is it that I really need to help this child learn so that that child would be better, would be better supported in this classroom, and then secondly, what are some strategies I have in my toolkit that I can use? But it doesn't mean I have to take the child out of the activity, or as you said, develop some big new elaborate activity to support the child, but rather I can do that. If I'm intentional about it, then I can do that within the context of an activity that I already have going on in my classroom. So thank you for that comment.
Let's see. We do not, that was the only comment on the question and answer box. And then in the chat, we do not have any comments, but I did type into the chats. I said, please feel free to type your answer in the chat. We just okay. And that's as far as we've gotten in the chat. So we do not have any comments in the chat quite yet.
Okay. All right. Well, this is like I said, it's a little bit difficult doing the things you would typically do in a normal workshop in a webinar. But I did want to, I know when I'm training early care and education providers, I don't like to say, oh, you need to do hands-on, you learn by doing, and not provide an opportunity for you to do. And so I wanted to present at least something with you today that you could hopefully take back and use in your classroom. So I'll proceed then, and if something comes up, then we can still talk about it. There will be time at the end that we'll have an opportunity to for me to answer questions. So the next tier that we're going to talk about is Tier 3. And features of Tier 3 instruction. First of all, this is not special education. And so sometimes people tend to think that, that we're talking about, when we're talking about really intensive instruction, that we're talking about instruction we do only for children with disabilities. And that's not what I'm talking about. It can be used with any child. And in addition to children with disabilities, it could be used with a child who's an English language learner, who's just come into the classroom and is having difficulty understanding the demands of the classroom. Can be used for a child who has challenging behavior as well. And as I said earlier, Tier 3 instruction is used to teach those foundational skills that are preventing the child from accessing and participating in and making progress in the general curriculum. And so these are children that are nonverbal, that are not speaking and not expressing. And, I'm not talking about toddlers that are nonverbal. I'm talking about, 3-year-olds who are still having difficulty. I'm talking about children who, maybe have been one of those children that have been at home for 2 years and this is all they know how to do with their fingers. And so they need to learn how to manipulate objects in the right appropriate way. That's a foundational skill. I am not going to be able to be successful when I go to school if I don't know how to use my hands. And I'm not going to be able to learn how to write if the only thing that I know how to do is this, because we have to develop fine motor skills in order to be able to learn how to write and do those other fine motor tasks. And so these are barriers to learning that are going to prevent the child from doing other more sophisticated learning. And so when we're talking about tier 3, we call these systematic instructional strategies. And systematic instruction are strategies that are much more intentional. They're much more individualized, and they are delivered with greater intensity so that children can learn important prerequisite foundational skills to learning. And so these may or may not be procedures that you have heard of in the past. They typically fall into 2 categories. The first are enhanced milieu teaching strategies, and the second are response prompting procedures. And what I'm going to do today in the short time that we have left is that I'm going to describe these sets of procedures for you. And I'm going to also provide you with a resource that I would recommend that you consider getting if you are working with children that you think need this level of instruction. And so the first are enhanced milieu teaching. I alluded to the fact earlier that children who are born in and live in poverty are less likely to learn language at a much slower rate than children who are from middle and upper income families. And sometimes you may have heard of the 30 million word gap, which is a study that was done a number of years ago that demonstrated that relationship. From that set of studies, there are a set of procedures that were developed called milieu teaching strategies or naturalistic language interventions. And enhanced milieu teaching is a naturalistic intervention that uses a child's interest in initiations as opportunities to model and prompt language in everyday context. So we can use these procedures with every child, but they're really designed for children who are early language communicators. And there are 3 components to enhanced milieu teaching. The first is what we should be doing with children all the time, which is developing responsive interactions with them. So it's following a child's lead. It's talking to a child about things that they are interested in. It is responding to their initiations. So responding to any form of communication that they use. And so that's foundational to enhanced milieu teaching. The second component of enhanced milieu teaching is that we arrange the environment in such a way that we create an opportunity for the child to communicate. And there are 3 different types of environmental arrangement strategies that we can use. The first one is access, is limiting a child's access. And so the way that I do this, for example, is that I put an item in a place where the child cannot get to it. So if I know that the child, for example, really loves to play with Play-Doh, then I may put that Play-Doh in a place that is up on a shelf where that child can't reach that Play-Doh. And that creates an opportunity for the child to have to ask for the Play-Doh. So sometimes children don't talk because they don't have an opportunity to talk. And so environmental arrangement strategies create those opportunities. Another environmental arrangement strategies is where I create, sometimes they're called silly situations. And so, for example, I might do something that's slightly out of routine to see if the child notices it and comments on it. Or I might do something like, we're getting ready to go out on the playground, and I pretend like I'm going to put the child's coat on, that creates the opportunity for the child to say, no, and look at the child and I'll say, what's wrong? And the child might say something like, the coat is too little for you. So creating those kinds of strategies enables the child and provides an opportunity for the child to be able to request and to ask for things that they need. The third part of enhanced milieu teaching are prompting strategies. And so this is modeling for the child what they're supposed to say. A lot of times when we're teaching child to communicate, we ask lots of questions, and but we don't sometimes provide them with the model. So for example, I've seen teachers who are trying to teach children to make choices. And so I give them an array of paints and I say, what color, what color do you want? Hoping that the child will point to or will say the color that they want. And then if the child doesn't do it, what sometimes happens is the teacher will say, come on, tell me which one you want. Point to the one you want. And so remember that teaching sequence I talked about earlier. Instead of providing that feedback that helps the child, what they do is that they just keep asking the question over and over and over again, not giving the child enough of an opportunity to respond. And so with enhanced milieu teaching, what I'm doing is I'm giving the child a certain number of seconds to respond. So if I say to that child, which color do you want? I have red, I have blue. Which one do you want? And then I wait 3 seconds. I give the child time to process, because little children's minds take time to process. And then if the child doesn't respond, then I say, you like red, you want red. Say red, and I get the child to respond. Another situation where I'm using enhanced milieu teaching, I worked with a little boy one time who was just beginning to use words and sign language together. So I was teaching his mom, I was coaching his mom how to support him to use those together. So we used limited access. So he loved his juice at snack time. And so his mother would set his cup a little far away from him so he couldn't reach it in his high chair. She set it away from him. And then when he reached for the cup, he'd go, Mom would say, what do you want? And then she would wait 3 seconds. If he didn't say what he wants, she would say, Peter, say more, and wait for him to respond. If he didn't respond, then she would say more. If he still didn't respond, then she would physically prompt him to do it. And so we're creating an opportunity. Same thing she would do with when he was playing with, he loved to play with cars and trucks. So she would go zoom, zoom, and she would play with the cars. And then she would stop, and then she would take the car away, and he would reach for the car. And when he would go, she would say, what do you want? And she would wait. And then she would give him the opportunity to respond. And so that creating an opportunity and modeling for children is at the essence of what enhanced milieu teaching is. And for teaching new language skills for children, this is a very, very powerful practice that, if used consistently enough and with enough frequency, will help children learn language. And I believe, oh, no, this is the wrong one. I'll come back to that video in just a second. So another set of procedures that is very effective in teaching children who are missing prerequisite skills are called response prompting procedures. And I should have said on this other slide here, this is a book. It's called Methods for Teaching Early Education. And this book is by Justin Lane, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Kentucky, and some colleagues from Vanderbilt University. It's a wonderful resource for learning to teach children to use language intervention strategies. The next set of procedures are called response prompting procedures. And these are a set of instructional procedures that use prompts to ensure that children perform correct responses. And I don't have time today to talk about all of these instructional strategies, and that's the reason why I've here again provided you with a resource by Dr. Belva Collins, who is a former colleague of mine at the University of Kentucky. And this gives you some step-by-step procedures for how to use all of these different strategies. I do want to show you one strategy that's been effective in teaching children play skills. So sometimes it's really hard to think, well, how do we teach children? So there's a procedure called play skills. So there's a procedure called system of least prompts, where we give the child the opportunity to do the skill independently. And then if the child doesn't do it correctly, then we give just a little bit more support. And then if the child still can't do it, we give just a little bit more support until the child is finally able to do it independently. And so I'll show you in this video how this teacher is trying to teach this child to share. All right, so what you see in that video is that you see a little girl who has difficulty when somebody tries to take something from her. Then this is a child that is, you saw her kind of bat out and reach like this. And so the teacher takes the toy from her and is waiting for her to say, "Mine, please." And then the child does not do it. And so the teacher waits again to say, "Mine, please," and gives that model and does the model twice. And if the child still doesn't do it, then the teacher gives the child the toy. And so using those very consistent set of prompts and cues in a very consistent way over time, these are very effective procedures for teaching some of those basic skills that children have. They seem very simple, and you probably say, well, I do that all the time. And you may do those procedures all the time. But they are also a set of procedures that have been used in a lot of research for teaching children, especially children with disabilities. So today, what I've talked about so far are three elements of the curriculum framework. I've talked about how we collect assessment information. That's the first component. The second component is how we identify the outcomes we're going to teach. And then we've talked so far about activities and instruction, and we've talked about universal instruction, we've talked about focused instruction, and we've talked for just a little bit about Tier 3 or systematic instruction. The fourth element of the curriculum framework is performance monitoring or progress monitoring. And so when we are doing progress monitoring, we are collecting data on children to see whether or not the instruction that we are using is working or not. As with the other elements of the curriculum framework, we recommend that when you're thinking about collecting data, that you are collecting data in this kind of tiered model, if you will. So if we want to find out how children are making progress on all of the outcomes that we are trying to teach, all of the early learning standards, then what we might do is that we might implement and we might use a curriculum-based assessment at the beginning of the school year and then at the end of the school year to see if children are making progress or not. If I'm trying to see whether or not children are making progress on their early writing skills, which is maybe a Tier 2 outcome, then maybe what I might want to do is that I might want to have a writing sample, and I collect that writing sample every other week to see if children's writing is improving or not. So I'm doing a little bit of, I'm doing collecting more progress monitoring data on a skill that the child is having difficulty with, where their development is stalled. And then if I'm teaching a skill, like a child to express their wants and needs, a child to share materials, a child to attend to a task, that's up here at tier 3, that I'm going to be collecting data on a much more frequent basis, because I want to see if those interventions that I've implemented are effective or not, or if there's something that I need to change. It might be that I might need to increase the amount of time that I wait for the child to respond. It might be that perhaps I'm teaching a goal that is too difficult for the child. It might be that I might need to use a different type of adaptation. It might be that I need to make sure that that the tier 1 foundational instruction that I'm providing is effective for the child. But I need to look at the data. I need to collect data to see whether or not the instruction that I'm providing is effective or not. Sometimes we talk about collecting data in early childhood settings a lot of times, but in a lot of cases, we collect a lot of data and we don't use it. And so we have to know not only how to collect the data, how much data collect, but more importantly, how we're going to use the data to make instructional decisions. And so there's a whole other set of workshops that I could do on how to collect data. But I wanted to end by just talking about the fact that it is important that once we have implemented instruction, it's very important for us to collect data to see whether or not our instruction is working or not. So what I've tried to do in our time together is to give you all a framework for how to support children who have a variety of different learning needs by realizing the importance of developing a strong foundation for learning for them, but also recognizing that sometimes that foundation is not enough. And that it is important for us to realize that we have other things in our toolbox so that we can draw upon those other types of procedures and those other strategies for increasing the opportunities for providing instruction, for individualizing instruction more. And that in order to do that, it's important for me to gather good assessment information on children so that I know what their individual goals are. And it's important for us to be able to collect data to see whether or not the instruction that we are implementing is working or not. And so I'm going to leave you all with a little quote for the day, and then I'm going to open it up for some questions. One of the people that I believe is one of the most influential people in early care and education is Fred Rogers. And there's still a Fred Rogers Institute, and I love his quotes, and I use them all the time when I do any kind of training. And so this particular quote, this is one of my favorite pictures of Mr. Rogers with a child. This is a child who has a visual impairment. And I love the way that he's looking at and he's developing a relationship with the child. And the quote says, if you could sense how important you are to the lives of those you meet, how important you can be to the people you may never dream of. And so I think this is the essence of what I believe is important in what we do in early care and education, is in developing those relationships and recognize how important we are in the lives of the children that we work with. And that is at the basis of everything that we're doing. And that regardless of what the child's label is, regardless of what their background is, regardless of what they come in with when they come into our program, that it's important for us to develop those relationships, recognizing that we have to have other things that we can do to support their learning. And so I'm going to stop here, and that leaves us with about 10 minutes, Walt, for any questions that we have from the group.
We do not have any questions quite yet in the Q&A box, and I checked the chat box, and we do not have a question in the chat box. I did put a prompt saying, please feel free, Doc, to ask Dr. Grisham a question in the chat box. So I just put that in the chat box.
Okay.
And looks like we still do not have a question has not popped up yet.
Okay. Well, I will put in the chat box, I will put my email address in case folks have questions after this is over with. Oh, but I didn't send it to everyone.
Yeah, I think
so.
if you, there's a drop down menu on the arrow. We have your email address. Okay. Any further questions for Dr. Grisham? Oh, okay. Hearing none. I would like to thank Dr. Grisham for this tremendous presentation. As advertised, this has been great. It's been an honor and a privilege for Dr. Grisham to join us today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, especially for those who have attended online. Be well and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you all very much. Have a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.